All right. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Today, this is our second webinar in a series on leadership development for sustainability professionals with Erin Bauer. This one is focused on gaining leadership buy-in through storytelling. So I'm excited to learn with you all today. Before we do that, just a couple of brief things from me. If you haven't met me, my name is Jessie Servi-Ortiz. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Business Council. We're a member organization, so businesses and individuals join, and in exchange, they get different things. Can you hear me okay, Erin? Just nod. Yeah, okay, great. So part of our mission is to accelerate the integration of sustainable business and to build sustainability leaders. So through membership, we do this in a variety of ways. Helping you learn, right? Hosting these monthly webinars so that you can learn different topics on sustainability to help integrate it into your business. Our business members get access to our Green Masters program to help you measure and improve your sustainability outcomes. We facilitate connection in a variety of ways and help you share your sustainability stories through our business awards and in other ways. So we do also offer sustainability services for those businesses who would like to go further faster. You can reach out if you want to learn more about that. And last but not least, I am here to invite you, if you haven't already registered for our conference, which is coming up in just 2 short weeks. So we're going to be in La Crosse on November 4th and 5th. We're very excited about being in La Crosse right on the beautiful Mississippi River. It's a 2-day event. The day before, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The conference, November 4th, has local tours, the Upper Midwest Energy Forum, workshop hosted by Train, and then our Sustainable Business Awards and Green Masters Program Recognition Celebration, followed by the conference on the 5th. So I'll go ahead and drop that information in the chat if you'd like to learn more. And this is where I am going to hand it over to Erin.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessie. And I'm glad to see some familiar names and faces that I know of in the participant list. And if I haven't met you yet, my name is Erin Bauer. I've been a member with the Sustainable Business Council now since, I believe, 2019. So it's been some time. But my background is very strong in workforce development and professional development, as Jessie mentioned. And the reason why I want to talk to you all about this today, and the reason why we're doing a series on this, is that we know we can teach very technical skills, right? Things are trackable, things are measurable, things are able to be integrated within a lot of the business operations that you're already doing well in your business. But what we tend to maybe sideline a bit is the fact that at the end of the day, what sustainability needs is a people connection. We have to think about, when we talk about highly technical things, what does that actually mean from a human development story? And that we depend on others in order to do what we need to do in our jobs. And so this is where, Jessie, we've talked a lot, I know, in the last several years about the feedback we get from the conference, like she mentioned, and we see time and time again this need pop up with, I need to gain leadership buy-in. I can't do something unless my leaders are bought in. And that's 100% true, right? We need support not only from the top, but as we talked about in the previous webinar, and that's the webinar that Jessie had shared in the email with you all today, the recording, we talked about in the first of this webinar series, there's also the understanding of developing a mindset of enterprise leadership. And that means being able to see the system overall and being able to make allies throughout the company, especially for a sustainability professional, in order to move forward. So today we're going to be picking up where we left off with that last webinar, and we're going to be talking about the storytelling skills for influence, reporting, and decision making. And if you are very intrigued by this, what we talk about today, please come visit us at the conference in La Crosse, because we're going to be doing a workshop on the ground there, talking about different archetypes of sustainability and even helping to identify how we get that leadership buy-in even more ingrained. All right, so let's get started. So as Jessie mentioned, my name is Erin Bauer. I've been involved with a lot of different sustainability groups here throughout the years. most primarily right now from an active practitioner standpoint. I am teaching with the University of Wisconsin Green Bay part-time, and the class that I teach there is geopolitical systems in sustainability. And the reason why I think this is really important from a leadership standpoint is that geopolitics depends so much on relationship building. So there's also the why and there's the how, but there's, from the technical standpoint, but it's really about the people and it's really about the connections that we're making and how storytelling in many ways prompts people to act. We can't do things unless we have people bought into what we're trying to get them to do. But as we'll see, motivation and incentives play a huge role in that. So we're going to talk about that today. All right. So I want to start off with the definition of sustainability from the Sustainable Business Council's perspective. And you might be asking why. And the reason why I love this definition is because this definition actually doesn't have any jargon in it. It says sustainability is pursuing business growth strategy that creates long-term stakeholder value by seizing opportunities and managing risks related to the company's environmental and social aspect or impacts. And if you think about that, anyone off the street can read that and get a good sense of what it is we're trying to do. We're not talking about carbon neutral, net zero. We're not throwing in a standard. We're not throwing in any else that's more of a technical jargon. We're able to use this as our elevator pitch when we're talking to anyone across the organization saying, this is why I do this and I need your help. If we're thinking about this from truly a business growth strategy standpoint, this is also what helps cement the authority that we can help build in sustainability. As we know, sustainability is very politicized. It has been for the last several years, probably the better part of the last decade, but it's also working very well in other parts of the world. So when we think about if we're really struggling to get our message across, it might just be that we have to change the wording in how we talk about this. And it might also have to be the incentives in how we propose this. I've heard some people say, well, it's just the right thing to do. But from a business perspective, that's not measurable. We really can't measure what the right thing to do is because it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But when you start talking about it from a stakeholder value aspect, when you think about ROI, when you think about opportunities and managing risk, that actually does have weight. And it could probably ease you into a little bit more of gaining someone's attention that maybe you've been having a hard time breaking through to. And we're going to see why this matters. So this is a slide, and I know there's a lot going on this, and you'll get this deck after this. But the main thing to take away from this slide is this was a recent study done by GlobeScan, and I actually use this in my university class. And the thing that I really wanted the students to pick up on is not the wide array of percentage points and the things that are leading to judicial actions in the world of sustainability, right? Because it's a geopolitical class, so we talk a lot about policy. But look at what the top line is. It's really talking about the fact that in a global study that was done, they're seeing that there's bigger impact for really the education and capacity building in sustainability leadership than there is for pretty much anything else on this list. Now, 1 percentage point behind it is the fact that, yes, we need to advocate for better government regulations and enforcement. That's a true statement. But I will say industry can move far quicker than any governmental body can, and that's where you come into play. If we're talking about truly building culture and advocacy, it's how we tell the story. And courts and regulations are going to remain an option, but it's not the only option to get people to do what we want them to do. It's obviously the carrot and the stick, right? Like it has to be enforcement of a regulation. But when we see administrations change, when we see relationships change between countries, when we see that even municipalities that are neighboring cities or neighboring towns and even the county level can't get along necessarily from a governmental standpoint, no regulation is going to come save us, if that makes sense. So it's more about what do we have as a sphere of influence that we can look at bringing others with us and talking to them in real terms that gives them that sense that, okay, I can get this. Also, it's probably already integrated in something I'm already doing, right? We're not asking for a heavy lift. We're asking for maybe a slight change or a modification. And that's where that education and capacity building really does remain number one. And the other piece of this is there was a recent article from Trellis, and I thought this was kind of spicy, so I wanted to include it because it does kind of help this conversation. And the article really talked about our sustainability terms helping or hurting us. And, as we went into 2025, we knew things were going to be challenging, right? That was kind of an understatement. But the real key part of this article was talking about the fact that in their view, the sustainability profession is just so rife with lingo or jargon that it just kind of lacks specificity. And it's also not helping accountability, and it's also alienating outsiders. So if we think about the fact of we know what we're talking about, right? When I say net zero, most of you are probably nodding your heads and saying, yep, I get it. But if I'm telling my mom what I'm working on and I drop net zero, she's going to look at me like, I have no idea what that means, right? She's a smart lady, but she has no idea in her day to day what net zero is or why it would benefit her. But if we talk about, I really want to reduce pollution so that we have cleaner air, she suffers from asthma, so that's of interest to her. So if we're talking about this in a little bit of a different way, that is what we start to see move the needle in buy-in. And I think the other thing we also have to understand is that if we're in a huge company, right, if we're in a company that's multinational or has many different departments, different folks across the organization that we need to partner with, such as financial, legal departments, supply chain or procurement, their focus is so narrow on what they're trying to do that if we just lob jargon over the wall at them, or maybe an acronym or something that's just not in their day-to-day vernacular, it's probably just going to fall flat, right? They're probably not going to make time for it. It might not seem urgent. And so what we really need to feel out for them is how can we talk to them in more human terms that are going to really start to get their attention. And then also, as we talked about in the first webinar, that allyship, that building that relationship, that we can start becoming just a good partner, and knowing that when we come to them, that we're coming to them talking about value, talking about maybe making things easier, more efficient, and ultimately, we're doing things in a more optimal way that we can measure, and then everyone wins in that. So I like how they ended this quote in the article where they were just really talking about the first step to recovery is recognition. It's just admitting the fact that maybe you are part of the problem in a way. And it's a good problem to have, but it's just saying, okay, if I need to talk to somebody a little bit differently, what can I do to do that, right? Okay, so this was a really good article. I do recommend reading it. They have a whole list of the different cliches that they're recommending that we just kind of set aside for a little bit. It doesn't mean that we're going off mission. It just means let's make sure we're talking about this in a real sense. And the reason is that I think this meme kind of sums this up. And I'm a fan of this meme. It first appeared in 2019. And any of you are Real Housewife fans, you probably know what this comes from. But Smudge the cat is on the right-hand side, and Taylor Armstrong's on the left-hand side. And this first appeared when there was a couple arguments, I think, emerging in the news, and someone on Twitter decided to use it for illustrating conflict in general. But I found this one that was more related to sustainability. I think it was about a year ago, and it just cracked me up because we're saying someone really likes plants, right? Like, and she's saying like, you said no more plants. And the person's saying, no, I said no more plants. And it's where the comma placement is just blowing it off. It's just exploding it. And something that came to mind was, we've all seen the meme, I think, where it's commas matter, and it's let's eat grandma, or there's let's eat grandma. And it has a different connotation, right? We can be saying the same thing, but the way that we come across just might completely fall flat without intending to, right? We really want to make a difference. We're really wanting to get somebody on our side. But in this era that we're living in, the digital age, digital connotation it's so hard to reach the same type of meaning that it does when you're face to face with somebody, or with you're even in this type of environment where you're seeing me with my facial expressions, with hand gestures, with body language. There's just so many ways in which a lot of times we can inadvertently miscommunicate something, and we just never intended to. But that also comes down to improving our communication. We have to understand that a lot of times just perception is reality. This might be where we want the science to speak for it, we want the science to lead with it, but someone just might not be technically adept to read the science. And so if we're shoving science at somebody, it might not matter. And a lot of times I think we look back to seeing like, well, how did we get here, right? Like, why are things so difficult right now? You can usually tell as things go on where the breakdown in communication occurred. And it's usually when potentially people just sort of fell off because they didn't feel like they were either included in what the message was, or perhaps they just didn't really understand it. And so all of a sudden you're in a very contentious or conflicting type of situation. It's awkward, and you really never intended to get there when when you first set out. So I think it's really important to remember, and this is something that I talk about with my students a lot, is perception is reality. It really doesn't mean that someone is not believing in what we're doing or that someone is actively working against us. It just means that they probably have no idea what it is we're talking about, and that we just need to change the conversation. So that sounds pretty easy, right? Like it's easier said than done is the cliche. But there are some ways in conflict management where this comes up a lot. And this is something that's pretty typical in leadership development classes. And it's really just thinking about the slowing down and truly listening and then adjusting to your audience, right? And this should be kind of pretty, common knowledge to a lot of you, but it just helps to look at it again and maybe just get a refresher. What I've seen emerge in teams that I've worked with, a lot of times there might be a one-sided conversation happening, right? And this is where a lot of people who are subject matter experts, myself included, we can be very guilty of this, right? We come in, we're excited, we're ready to drop some knowledge, we're here to, make something happen. But all of a sudden we realize we've been dominating a conversation. Now, right now, this is a one-sided conversation because I'm speaking to you, but if we were in a room, we would be changing it, right? Like we would have a little bit more of that conversation. It would be more of a roundtable type of experience, and it would allow for other participants to share what they feel. And it's okay also if a participant says, you know what, I don't really buy this, or prove it. So that's where someone, who's used to speaking a lot, and leaders, obviously we are always in this position where a lot of times we're expected to be the one talking. You can just pause yourself and just say, I've been talking a lot. I'm going to pause, share your perspective with me. That can actually give a lot of permission to people who might be uncomfortable with raising their hand, or people who kind of need that prompt to stop for a minute and say, yeah, I'm either not getting this, or let's take a moment and explore something further. The other one that obviously should be kind of a little bit more of the moment right now is the defensive audience, right? And I mentioned the political aspects of sustainability, and right now we're living through that, and we've been living through that. And it's really about the time where just arguments is kind of just happening for the sake of argument, right? It's just kind of like the ability to go to battle or go into war, and you're trying to defeat the other side. That really, unfortunately, is not going to do anyone any good. If we're thinking thinking about being in a company, we've got supplier agreements, we've got customers to serve, we've got all these other extremities at play that we're trying to make whole, we're trying to satisfy those things. If there is a frustration point that bubbles up, just really kind of take it back down to the basics, right? What you're trying to do is just talk through potential solutions. And that is what sustainability is at the heart of it. It doesn't matter what it is you're trying to solve for, if it's an environmental, a social, or a governance issue, or all three in most cases. You're really just talking about continuous improvement and solution building. And so if you maybe deflate the emotion, or you bring it down to here's the core thing that we're looking to solve for, rather than some politicized word, net zero, carbon neutral, even unfortunately the word DEI has become very, explosive recently, then don't worry about it. And I know that there's purity tests out there where a lot of people get worried about, like, oh, we're green hushing, or we're not standing by our morals or our values. You still can, right? I would say, I think in the day that we're living in, it's more important about the work that's actually being done rather than maybe what we're exactly calling it. It doesn't mean that this is going to last forever. It just means that in the environment in which we're operating within, sometimes we have to make these little adjustments in order to just keep the ball moving. And the last thing, obviously, is the resistance to change. This is something that actually obviously bubbles up a lot in the class that I teach with geopolitics, right? There are just very clear instances of where bipartisan support right now is just not evident. And there is what we think, or we perceive, that there's just a holistic resistance to change where someone's just going to keep doing it because they can. That's when we look at where are the drivers and the motivations. What's the incentive structure in which someone is operating in order to do that? And the good news I can say is incentive structures don't always last, right? So if we are feeling really frustrated because we're thinking, okay, well, this industry is never going to change because of XYZ, the minute you start showing use cases or proving where things actually can work, that starts to change the narrative. And then you kind of almost get this cascade effect of the incentives start changing because people start growing interested. And it's more or less that you don't have to necessarily tell somebody what's happening, but you can use examples in where you're trying to make the change happen that starts to change that resistance and starts to make it more of like, hey, this is kind of the thing to do because it's either growing as far as a trend, it's getting popular, or it just ultimately is starting to achieve the goal that you're trying to get to. And a lot of times this is where the incentive structure comes down to funding, or it comes down to money. And I know that that might not feel good, right? Because a lot of times we want to do things that are for the goodness of others, or we want to do things that are more altruistic. But if we aren't talking about the ROI piece, this resistance to change a lot of times can just keep persisting. So I'm saying this as an advice to start thinking about how do you weave in value statements more? How do you weave in ROI more? And that is actually something we're going to be talking quite a bit about at the conference, because that is something that we know that our members want to get better at. But you can also use it from an emotional standpoint, and you can just say simply, help me understand what's holding you back from trying this. It could be something you didn't even expect. It could be something that is so niche to that person's team or that department, or maybe it's a supplier that maybe it just never crossed your mind. And so if it's not financial and it's not resource driven, maybe it's something completely else. And that is where you have an opportunity to start talking through it. So these are just a couple examples where it gives you some actionable language to use that starts to calm the situation down and starts to change the conversation too. And this is where we get into the art of storytelling. Now, this is a very simple model. This is actually a model that's used to produce video. So a lot of social media influencers or a lot of videographers use this model. And there's really just three key components to it. And that's why I love it, because it's so simple. And when we think about storytelling, everybody remembers just a really good story. But a lot of times in sustainability, we talk about it more in the metric standpoint. We talk about it, a lot we're throwing around parts per billion, or we're talking about, gigawatts, or we're talking about scope 3 emissions. That's going to go right over people's heads in many cases. We're really looking at, why do we build people connections to get things done? And it's because it's connecting back to the desire to be a part of it, the uniqueness of the situation, right? Like it's going to draw somebody in and say, oh, that's really interesting, or that means something to me. And then the complexity, or the why, that's where you can then help people start to connect and move in the direction that you want them to go. There's a fantastic story, and Jesse, I apologize. I'll drop the link in later when we're done. But it's from the Farm Link project, and one of the organizations that I'm on the board for, Be Local Wisconsin. We just had a viewing party a few weeks ago with the Farm Link team, and it's the story of how college kids basically upended the food distribution cycle to feed hungry people during COVID. So if you remember, if we go back in the Wayback Machine or in the time machine, during COVID, there were farmers that had to dump and had to basically bury food in the ground. Like they had already grown it, or they were dumping milk, or they just had nowhere to go with so much of the produce they had produced. Well, a team of students, they knew people were going hungry. This actually impacted students a lot. It impacted both college students and K through 12. A lot of kids depend on meals that the institutions provide, and they couldn't get to it. And when you watch the documentary, it's only about 20 minutes. It's pretty short. You realize that nowhere in the documentary did they use the word sustainability, net zero, or any of the type of jargons that we usually think of. What they were talking about is the fact that there was all this food going to waste. There were hungry people that needed the food in order to survive, and all they were basically talking about is, how do we connect that? And if you think about that, that's such a huge, powerful story building model, because it's very easy for people to relate to that, right? We all need food to survive, and most humans hate seeing something go to waste. It's a very emotional draw. Oh, thanks, Jesse. I saw it in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to watch this documentary, please do, because what it did for me is it just validated that at the end of the day, sustainability is in what these kids did, right? They're coming up with a solution to a known problem, but they're just thinking about it differently. And if we think about this model in storytelling, that there was a desire to help, there was a uniqueness of the problem of saying, how can people go hungry when we're wasting all this food? And then there's the complexity of like, okay, how do we solve for it? If we use that type of model, you can actually break through a lot of different barriers into figuring out how to get your own organization moving in a new direction. So let's think about that. So this is another slide from the Sustainable Business Council. What I love about this is that, again, it's simple. It's really thinking about why businesses value sustainability. The big one overall is reducing risk and operating costs. There's so much in sustainability that actually in many ways is just looking at risk differently. And it's also looking at cost differently, right? And for those of you that are practicing it, you know that if you're reducing waste, you're reducing risk, but you're also saving money. Well, that's number one, that any business person is going to understand that. But then these other things kind of have a little bit more emotional weight to them, right? We're thinking about attracting and retaining employees. This includes making sure they feel seen and they feel heard. This also enhances our brand and loyalty because we're being more visible with it, right? If we're treating our employees well, if our suppliers are feeling like we value them too, like throughout the value chain, well, then that enhances our reputation. People want to do business with us. And then obviously, innovation is huge in sustainability. We depend on it in order to move forward. And this also then enhances that relationships with our customers and stakeholders because they're going to look at us as being the game changer, right? They're going to say, oh, this company XYZ always has something new happening. I really want to connect with them. They will make time for you. And I think that's where things tend to get lost if we're just sending numbers over, if we're just talking about the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty. It's how do we inject a little bit more of these types of words that mean just a little bit more when we're having these day-to-day conversations. And this also really matters when we think about where in the hierarchy of the organization we are talking to somebody. So not all audience types speak the same business language daily, right? We know, and this is something we talked about in our last webinar with the enterprise leadership mindset. So if we think about when we build our allies, the executives are talking to the board of directors, and then the managers at the peer level should be building their allies across from them, right? That's their first team looking at the level next to them. But think about all these conversations that are taking place on a daily basis. There's so many different viewpoints happening and so many different types of reasons for the conversations happening that if we keep using the same metrics over and over, but we're not explaining how it differs per where the person is in the hierarchy, that can also fall flat. So this is just a friendly reminder to kind of go back and use that enterprise leadership mindset to think about when I'm having these conversations, people are looking to others for different types of messaging, but also the purpose behind the messaging really conveys back to what kind of words we use and how we want to make sure that when we're telling our stories, they mean the most to the person that's delivering or that's receiving it. So as a delivery person, how are we making sure we're connecting most with the people that we're talking to? And I will say from a leadership standpoint, if you're at the executive level, that's really tough to do because a lot of times you are having all the lines of communication are going all over the place. But to make sure that when we stay on message with who we're talking to, it can just break through a little bit easier, but it also allows for us to have more of a solidified vision too, because we're not trying to do too much, or we're not trying to use words that are maybe too siloed in a way. We're just making the message a little bit more broadcastable, if that makes sense, and making sure that others can help share the message too, so that we know when we're talking to an employee in our downline, that when they're talking to their peer, this similar messages, similar words are getting across, and it's not getting lost in the shuffle with other types of conversations that are happening. So a good illustration of this is also from a study that was recently out, an article, and this is on Trellis actually. And what I really love about this is that we are seeing in the industry in sustainability that chief sustainability officers are really identifying the fact that they have to adapt. So if we think about the evolution that sustainability has had, especially over the last better part of 50 years, chief sustainability officers, that wasn't even a role 20 years ago, right? So it is today, and a lot of companies have them intact. They haven't completely done away with it. But the purpose of that role might look very different from what it initially had set out. But the fundamental nature isn't changing, right? We are still wanting a champion at the leadership level to make sure sustainability is integrated, but it also has to work within the company structure, right? So there's a couple of key attributes that Trellis had identified that I really like. And the first one is that these CSOs self-identified that they felt like they were going to be a chameleon, that they had to be able to come in and respond to those varying needs, perspectives, and interests. And this goes back to that slide we just talked about, right? Like they know whoever they're talking to across their organization, if they're talking to finance, if they're talking to legal, if they're talking to supply chain, they're going to have to modify to their audience. They're going to have to make sure that whatever they're communicating about sustainability totally lies within the interests of that group. But the other piece of it is that they have to operate at the big picture and the granular level. So they're constantly going from here to here every day. And that is challenging. That is also where we see the orgs that are practicing sustainability the best, is that it's integrated throughout the company, because that is in many ways way more efficient and less exhausting for a sustainability practitioner to have to do. Because when it's not embedded across the organization, that is where you're having to flex pretty dramatically every day. So where can this help? Well, this can help when you start making KPIs, or the key performance indicators of that team's performance, even at the peer level, or the downstream level, making sure that it is in alignment with sustainability goals. And it can be simple, right? It could be waste related, it could be energy efficiency related, things like that. But at least there's something that every person in the organization knows that they play a role. And then that helps to alleviate that need for the CSO to help, to have to flex day to day and making sure that everyone's, doing the same thing that they need to do. But the most important thing, I think, that kind of tends to get shoved aside a little bit in leadership development is really that systems thinking aspect. And this goes back to that enterprise leadership mindset. This is just looking at problem solving in a new way. And it's thinking about, if I'm going to be achieving these goals on a holistic level, we have to acknowledge the fact that there's going to be all these different forces that come together to make this happen. And sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. But if we don't, what are the lessons we can learn from it to bring it back in? And this is where continuous improvement comes into play. So for those of you who know me, I come from the quality industry, and this is the bedrock of quality. This is a great way that if some of you are struggling and you're in a company that uses quality practices such as Lean or Six Sigma, start talking to those folks about what you're experiencing, because this is their bread and butter. They get systems thinking. They understand how problem solving is best served with quality practices. And I always think of sustainability as kind of the big sister to quality. Quality kind of started it in the 40s, and sustainability really has grown from that, because Lean, if you think about it, is one of the closest correlations to sustainable practices, right? It's less waste, it's thinking about the stakeholders, and there's so many things that are akin to it that if you're in an environment that already champions Lean, you're kind of already there. You're already doing a lot of the things, and it's more of a yes and situation than a yeah but. So thinking about the Lean perspective, and how do we use common practices that are already pretty ubiquitous within the manufacturing or within other types of industries? How do you just leverage something that's already well understood and start taking it to the next level? Okay, so here's something fun. And this is an article, again, actually a joint report that came out. Trellis had partnered and published this, but it was an Impact ROI and Sandbar Solutions co-branded piece that they published. And this is where it's talking about an archetype of sustainability. And this has really helped me over the years understand how to identify where leaders already are, or what the culture of the organization is, to start getting these things I just talked about off the ground. And they have identified 6. We're actually going to go in depth on these when we are at the conference in November. That'll be at the workshop that I mentioned before. But we're just going to talk about a few things to just kind of help put a frame of mind around this for right now. And if we think about it, these are the different types of sustainability archetypes that you can probably already picture in your mind. A box checker organization is, obviously just doing that, right? They're going through the motions. They're probably looking at sustainability from more of a compliance standpoint. This is really common with when they have a very high focus on environmental health and safety standards. So that's, they've been doing this for a long time. ISO 14000 series has been around for quite a while. It's more or less like yep, we've got it covered, and that's it. But when we start to see more of the brand and reputation driven companies, think of the Patagonias of the world, right? Think of the companies that really start to look at this as being a competitive advantage. This is where the game starts to change, because all throughout the leadership, they're understanding why sustainability has some of those qualities we talked about before. And it's also getting the buy-in part from the employees as well. So it's one thing to have a leader say, okay, we're going to become sustainable. But if an employee is saying, okay, great, I don't know what that means. That's where we just have to start educating. And I saw a comment in the chat from Julie of an example of how to adjust a concept from employee maintenance staff to an exec level. You have to bring it back again to that competitive advantage. So this brand and reputation example is a great point of that. How do you have a company that can stand by its claims and also deliver on what it's supposed to deliver, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to do business in how we do business. We have to keep the lights on. We have to do what it is we say that we do. But if you can start saying this is what we do, and we also deliver this value add on top of it, meaning that we've lowered emissions overall for cleaner air in our community. We've enhanced feedback processes for our employees to get additional training and to have a better performance on the job. Their retention rate therefore has gone up. These types of things start becoming a reputation builder and start differentiating the brand. And most people get why that's important. It's that's usually a pretty easy conversation to have. And then it also trickles into some of the other archetypes we see. There's impact and purpose focus, for example. Those are the B Corps of the world. Those are the B Corp certified brands that we see throughout the world that and they're growing. There's over 8,000 of them across the world where that is what they lead with. They happen to sell something or they happen to have a service, but they're putting it out there front and center saying we believe in XYZ and here's why. The other interesting ones are innovation driven and risk reduction. These are a little bit more complex. And like I said, we'll talk about this more at the conference. The report goes in a little bit more detail on this. And this is where innovation driven can be a really interesting one to follow. These are the Apples of the world, the Microsofts, the companies that they know they have a humongous impact no matter what, especially think of energy, right? Or AI right now obviously is a big hot topic because of energy consumption, water, but also our world depends on it. There's a huge amount of breakthroughs and innovations that are coming. So it's one of those, in economic terms, we call it a wicked problem, right? We need to innovate. We have to keep doing that. But we also need to be able to counter and make sure that the innovation we are producing is responsible. The other end of the spectrum, the risk reduction driven, that's also a very interesting one too. This is where companies really are more savvy on risk total, like from an overall driving standpoint. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but just know that each one of these has their own little bit of nuances that can help you start to sort through how these work together or how you can identify your own org and maybe start changing it. One thing to note is that a company can be two or more archetypes. And I know that might sound frustrating, but think about different divisions of the company and how they innovate or how that they operate. You could have, on the holistic standpoint, a company like an insurance company that's very risk focused, right? They're not going to do too much that's risky. But on the same point, they might be very impact and purpose focused because they know that their product insurance helps people live a better life. So there can be two thoughts happening at the same time. But hopefully what this report does, and they talk about sustainability tension management or STM, another acronym. But the reason why I bring it up is that there's a lot of great content in this report that talks about that adjusting from employee and leadership levels and starting to bring people onto the same page. So I really recommend it. And this also involves kind of that customizing sounds, right? So when we think about what I just mentioned, when we're thinking about how people talk to each other, we have to think about those motivations and incentives. And one of the ones that I just talked about was the box checker. If the box checker's main goal every day is just to stick with the status quo because let's say there's just so much going on, well, for right now, that might be what they're capable of doing. And it's also thinking about keeping up appearances because that's what expected. There's a great saying in quality that if you're not in compliance, you're not in business, right? Because at the bare minimum, you should be in compliance. Otherwise, you're going to probably not be in business. But there's probably more or less a concern of you change because you want to make money, but there's also the concern of the cost that comes involved to do that. So there might be a perception that the resources are limited, or there might be, no one in our industry is doing it, so there's really not like a competitive advantage for it, or maybe just no one from an external stakeholder standpoint is actually pressuring it. So if none of these things are happening, right, if there's really no competitive advantage to doing it, or there's no external stakeholder pressure, well, then there's really no incentive to make it happen. The unfortunate part is that a lot of multi-billion-dollar enterprises right now That's also kind of the bucket they fall into because they can't address every issue that comes their way just from the sheer scope of operations. The report does talk about this. I really like the way that they illustrate the challenges that come with this, but it's just something that we have to think about the kind of the law of physics, right? Depending on how big you are, if you're gargantuan, sometimes you can only address certain things that you can get to, and you're going to have to leave some things as they are, but it doesn't mean that you can't get to better, right? So I think that's the other understanding of this too, is that again, if we have a couple different archetypes happening at the same time based on which departments are doing what, there might be an overarching archetype, but there might be opportunity for another archetype to emerge, and then that other archetype might take over the other one if successes are able to be talked about and illustrated. So again, if we're thinking about that message, right, how do you get another archetype to kind of emerge? How do you get to change that? Again, it's rethinking the message. And it's really demonstrating again that sustainability is a corporate value proposition. It's really looking at how do we drive our innovation in the market to be competitive, to reduce costs and risk. And it's if we prioritize just a few of these efforts, you're going to gain momentum. So we're not going to try and do everything all at once. It's going to be, what are we already really good at? What can we capitalize on? And in the midst of us doing that, what do we pick up along the way that we can start to weave in? So here's a really good kind of example of how to articulate this. So again, this goes back to our video model of storytelling. And it's talking about if we've identified a team that's done really well at something, we champion that. So when we think about the desire, the complexity and uniqueness of this, we could say something like our operations team identified a 5% overall cost savings by working with supplier XYZ to reduce their packaging. So right there's the sustainability win, right? We know that waste was saved. But we say from a business opportunity standpoint, if we can renew the supplier agreements with this requirement over the next 12 months, it's going to reduce our waste removal and purchasing costs, and we can convert new customers with better offers. Now you've just built the case as to why employees should pay attention to this, because if you've got a supply chain team, right, they're going to have to get involved with supplier agreements. But also from a supply chain standpoint, it's of interest to them because it means business, that they're going to be at the table, they're going to be involved. And then especially from a customer standpoint, the customer potentially is going to benefit from this. So it's just making sure that whenever we have the opportunity to weave this together, we're maximizing the value of the statements we're making. There's one other quick thing I want to touch on, and this might just help you also frame your mind around these things. And it's that in many ways, we as working professionals, we truly are engaging with adult learning theory. And as an instructor, obviously, I have a sweet spot for this because this is something I do in my spare time. But it's also helpful just to know from a leadership development aspect. And that is that adults receive information very differently than younger people. And there's actually a term for it, of course, adult learning theory. And there's also an acronym for it because, of course. But here's the key takeaways as to why adult learning theory, I think, can be especially useful for you all. And it's because adult learning theory says about adults, and this has been decades of research, that adults prefer to be self-directed, right? We don't like to be told what to do. I'm an adult, I have a mortgage, I can drive a car, right? I can take care of myself, kind of thing. While we might not lead with that, that a lot of times will bubble up in our subconscious. From the first webinar that I had delivered, this is where the biases kick in, right? This is where we can look at that bias wheel. We can say, if someone's really defensive about something, well, it's probably because they might be not wanting to be told what to do. And I might have just come in and said, I need you to do this. So we just have to be conscientious of that, right? But also adults are not that they don't want to learn something new, they want to know why, right? If they're busy, they've got stuff to do. We've got bills to pay. We've got people to interact with, right? Why do I need to do something more? And so that's where that storytelling comes into play. Like we need to tell the story as to here's why I need you to do something. Here's why you might actually really love it. Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's talk about it. And then also it has to be related to what they have to do on their day to day. So that's where that work related experience comes into play. So this is where leadership can make room for people to do training, right? Additional training is critical to upskill and to breed innovation, but you have to allow people to weave that into their work related experiences, right? We have to give them the time and attention to do that. But also, if we weave it into a problem solving approach, a lot of people love solving problems, right? Sometimes it can be just really fun. And you're with a team and you can ideate and you can brainstorm. And that's where then you can also motivate people to feel something about this. And we call those the intrinsic or essential values, and extrinsic or external factors. So if we think about this framework for adult learning theory, it actually helps us break down our daily interactions and think, if I'm going to go forge a new relationship with someone who I've never had to work with before, or I'm going to get my team rallied around something, try this model, because it oftentimes helps you not only with your storytelling, but it also helps you approach people in a little bit of a different way and understand how you can help move them in the direction you want them to go. Okay, so I know that's a lot of information, but here's just a couple key summary points. So I just wanted to make sure that we're thinking about, in all of this, leadership development is just that, it's development, right? So you learn some new things hopefully today, but this takes time and flexibility. So just practice where you can, start to weave it in. I guarantee it's not going to be an overnight change. I've been working in leadership development now for 7 years. And before that, for 19 years, I was in corporate America, but it's been something that I've seen. The more that I've practiced it, the easier my job got over the years, because it was something that I just started being more conscientious of and just really discovered a passion for. So give yourself grace, give yourself the time and the flexibility to do it. And again, coming back to the jargon, just avoid it. If we're talking amongst ourselves at the conference, obviously we can drop net zero all day long and everyone gets it. But if we're in our organizations and we're talking with other people across the pond, or we're talking with people, in different departments, it might not make sense for them, right? So just really strive for clarity. And also remember just to work within your org's culture, right? If we go back to those archetypes, knowing where you are as a benchmark can be so clarifying, because then you're maybe not, butting heads with people. You're kind of just accepting the fact of, okay, we're here for right now. Doesn't mean we're going to be there forever, right? You can build that momentum for change, but at least you start getting where in the benchmark you can start from, and then where do you want to build new results for. Polished storytelling. Try it on your friends and family. Many times sustainability people, we know and love a lot of people who don't practice sustainability. Try it out. See what they say. I've coached my husband for years now on becoming a better recycler. He's still got room to go, but I'm explaining to him as to why we need to rinse things out before we put them in the bin and things like that. And it's just more or less training them to think about things in a different lens, but also meeting them where they are. And again, use that adult learning theory, use it to help customize your messages, and really just focus on what are the priorities at the hand. What do you have to get done today, but where can you build action, and especially where can you build that value, right? Because that's really what's going to connect. So Jesse, I wanted to make sure I left some time for questions. So it looks like we've got a few minutes remaining here. So I don't know if people want to come off of mute, or if there was anything in the chat that you needed to touch on.
Yeah, great. If anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. That's an easy way for me to know that I could call on you. Um, what this is sort of making me reflect on is just like, this stuff is hard. It's not as easy as it is in practice as it is in theory and hearing about what to do, right? And so just the permission to give yourselves grace in dealing with this and practicing it. Having worked in this space for nearly 20 years now, I have to say, like, it's on one of your slides, you had that point about the CSO, and like one of the hardest pieces on that was to have to switch from strategy to technical detailed work. Like, that is the hardest part about being a sustainability professional. You have to be really skilled in a variety of things. you know, um, and this is a part of it. This is a part of the hardest part of it, I feel like, is getting buy-in and being an influencer. I'm always telling sustainability folks that think of yourself as an influencer, because you need to influence behavior change, you need to influence strategy change, you need to influence thought change, right? And that is not an easy task. So just a few tips from me from over the years is also just kind of reiterating what you said in different ways, is understand your folks' maybe learning styles. Sometimes that's hard if you're like a consultant or not working with the same people every day. But if you have the luxury of working with the same people every day, try to get to know them personally, understand what they value, be willing to listen. Like she said, that goes a long way in helping you figure out how to rephrase something for the floor shop employee to the leader, right? The leaders want the high level nuggets. They want how it relates to strategy, how it relates to business value, what it's going to mean in dollars and cents. The shop floor person just wants to know why they need to put it in the other, over here. Um, and I find that really connecting with values is a great way to do that, as well as even like learning styles. Again, that kind of depends on the context and what you're working. So, does anybody have any questions, specific things they want to hear, or share an example maybe of a success or a challenge you have in this with this? Don't be shy. It's your turn time to learn.
Well, one thing, what might be of note to everyone is, and especially like I'll pull again from my class materials. A lot of times we think that if someone is totally against sustainability, it's because they don't like science or they don't get science. Because I'm a bit of a nerd, I paid attention to the exit polling data after the 2024 election. And what's fascinating about the exit polling data is that when you look at, and this is again self-reporting, so Republicans and Democrats, there was actually very even stats for both sides, meaning uh, have kids or don't have kids, college education or no college education, at level of affluence actually was interesting, or level of income. Where it starts to diverge is beliefs. And that's where the storytelling comes into play. That's where that example I shared earlier about the farm link, these were college kids, in some cases Ivy League educated kids, reaching out to a farmer in the middle of the Great Plains. Now, in what normal, if you think about would the two have ever met another environment, the answer probably is not. But it's the willingness to connect, and it's like Jesse, like you said, it's the willingness to listen. And when the kids talk about the fact that they got a lot of rejection, there wasn't a lot of farmers that were willing to talk to them at first, but once they snagged a big farmer and he opened up his doors and he's like, yeah, come get the food, all of a sudden it was this snowball effect, and they understood how to talk differently to the farmers. They understood what words to say that was going to get the attention. It's such a great success story because now they're a multi-million-dollar organization that are feeding people across the nation. But it just started with trying. It started with just kind of having an idea and putting yourself out there. Yeah. So hopefully that inspires somebody or makes you think a little bit differently about your own challenges that you're facing.
Yeah,
All right,
great.
and I was just going to
Oh,
say, and hopefully, Julie, I answered your question. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to it, but hopefully we addressed what you were looking for.
the only thing I was going to add is just, I lived in the city my whole life or the suburbs until the last 2 years. I moved to a rural community, and I can like, not only did I experience this in business because I've worked in like construction, which is one sort of core ideal set of beliefs typically, to like local organic food, which is generally another. And then moving from urban setting to a very rural setting, like absolutely, like I show up differently, right? And that's not me putting my values aside. That's me wanting to build relationships and willing to meet people where they're at to, have subtle long-term influence, not just kind of one-offs, right? So we're really in it for the long game here. This is not try things. Don't be afraid to, see what works. Ask the shop employees, how can maybe you get a champion and like talk to that champion, be like, how can I talk to other, I'm just generally saying shop floor employees. Don't take offense to that. It's just a category, right? Um, and just ask them, how can I better connect with your employees, right?
Well, and I think to build on that too, Jesse, there's a great session that Michelle Miller will be giving at the
Mm,
conference about employee
hmm
engagement coming up on November 5th. So again, to help plug the conference,
Mhm.
because we all want to see you there, but there is going to be a full track about human engagement, basically, or we call it the human element. But we are going deep on this. We really want to help you all because, as Jesse mentioned, this is really tough stuff. It's not necessarily second nature, and a lot of times we don't always go looking for conflict, or we don't always we might try to shy away from it. But think of conflict as an opportunity to improve something. It just means that something needs to get resolved. It doesn't mean that it can turn into a fight. It doesn't mean that it has to come to something negative. It just means that you have an opportunity to solve for something and potentially actually make a new friend. If you come
Mhm.
through and you build a partnership with somebody, that could be a game changer. And suddenly you've got an ally where you never knew you had one.
Mhm. Great. Thanks so much, Erin. Thanks
Yeah.
everyone for joining us today. I will follow up with the recording to this webinar as well in the next couple of days. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you all at the conference. I hope you can join us. If I haven't met you, please make sure you come and introduce yourself to me and Erin that day, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, Erin.